The razor-edged peaks of the Veyron Proving Grounds clawed at the stormy sky of Arcturus IV, the air thick with the tang of ionized dust, a byproduct of endless tactical skirmishes. Mason lay flat atop a craggy ledge, pressed into the stone's unyielding embrace, his pulse carbine cool against his cheek. Below, 7 armored sentries moved with mechanical precision, their armor glinting dully as they swept the canyon in a tight V formation, boots crunching on the broken scree. He adjusted his scope, following the lead sentry, a hulking shape with a jagged crest and a ceremonial spear slung across its back. The Veyroni never abandoned ritual, not even in war. Mason's gaze flickered across the canyon's battered expanse, cataloging every potential route and blind spot. He was a shadow among stones, patience honed razor-sharp by years of survival. A low hum crackled in his ear, pulling him from his thoughts. "Grid is hot, boss," came the voice over his comm. Riker, his second. Riker's accent was pure outer belt, broad, brash, and cheerful, a stark contrast to Mason's clipped tones. Mason pictured him crouched behind a boulder somewhere out of sight, massive arms resting atop a plasma repeater like a cat with its favorite toy. "You've got 8 minutes to dazzle the purple crowd," Riker joked. Even with the tension hanging heavy in the air, he couldn't resist needling Mason. "Dazzle or give them a migraine," Mason grunted. His thumb idly brushed the textured surface of a remote detonator strapped to his vest, feeling for each familiar notch. He wasn't here for style. The Veyroni, proud, ritualistic warriors with a taste for pageantry, were losing ground to the relentless chitin swarm, whose only strategy was overwhelming numbers and ravenous instinct. The Veyroni needed something different, something crude, something human, someone who fought dirty. He waited, heartbeat slowing as the sentries passed a jagged basalt ridge, their formation perfect in its symmetry. Mason glanced upward, past the target, to a precarious ledge he'd scouted hours before. Instead of mining the field with traps, he'd rigged charges high above, where the Veyroni would never expect. The plan was almost disrespectful to their sensibilities, but Mason was here to win, not impress. He exhaled, a brief cloud in the chill air, and pressed the detonator. The explosion ripped through the storm's growl, a violent thunderclap that echoed from peak to peak. Debris cascaded from above, a torrent of shattered rock and metallic shrapnel. Mason watched as the avalanche didn't strike the sentries but crashed down just ahead, reshaping the canyon floor. The Veyroni formation faltered, their disciplined lines buckling. Their AI routines scrambled, voices crackling and commands overlapping as the squad bunched up, funneled by instinct into the kill zone Mason had mapped in his mind. He rolled to his elbow, sighted his carbine, and flicked it to rapid fire. Armor-piercing rounds spat from the muzzle in disciplined bursts. Mason wasn't aiming for kills. He targeted optics, servos, exposed joints, disabling rather than destroying. Sparks flew, purple blood spattered the stone, and the sentries collapsed, their systems hissing and failing. It was loud, ugly, and over in less than a minute. A second of silence stretched, then Riker's voice crackled through. "Zone clear," he reported, a note of pride threading his words. "They'll remember that one." High above, inside the Veyroni command post, Commander Lysara stood rigid, her ornate armor gleaming under the harsh, blue-tinged lamps. Officers flanked her, their faces veiled and voices hushed, murmuring a mixture of awe and barely concealed disapproval. Lysara's crimson, pupilless eyes never left the monitor, which flickered with a thermal outline. A human figure, emerging from the settling dust, lean and upright. Something in the man's silhouette, his posture, the deliberate way he moved, sent a tremor through her chest, a resonance she hadn't felt in nearly a decade. It couldn't be. Down in the debrief chamber, Mason strode through the doors, ignoring the icy Veyroni stares. He moved with the self-assured gait of someone who'd survived on a dozen worlds, dust caked in the seams of his tactical gear. His face, lean and sharp, was bisected by a scar over his right eyebrow, his gaze flinty, calculating. He grabbed a flask from the table and drank deep, letting the water cool his parched throat. Commander Lysara entered, her imposing figure framed by the archway. She stood taller than any human present, violet skin almost iridescent in the muted light. Her emerald hair spilled in waves over her black spiral horns, and the intricate Gothic plates of her armor whispered with every step. She halted before him, her presence a challenge and a question. "Your tactics are unrefined, Terran," she said, her voice a deep, melodic timbre that echoed off the chamber's stone walls. "They work," Mason replied, uncapping the flask for another swig. "You didn't hire me for elegance." She stepped closer, peering into his face, her gaze searching along the hard lines of his jaw, the familiar curve of his ear, the old scar. The air between them crackled, charged with the scent of cool stone and ozone, hers, unmistakable and oddly familiar, though Mason could not place it. Her four-fingered hand rose, trembling ever so slightly, stopping just short of his cheek. "Merrick," she whispered, her voice raw with disbelief. "You lived." Mason's smirk faded, wariness hardening his features. The name rang hollow. He remembered nothing before waking in a medbay 9 years ago, memories lost to a sea of pain and static. "You've got the wrong guy," he said, stepping back, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Is this some loyalty test?" Her hand dropped, the ghost of hope draining from her eyes, replaced by a grief so sharp it was almost visible. "No," she breathed. "I would know you anywhere." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the ache of lost years and things left unsaid. Mason's first assignment was aboard the Obsidian Warden, Lysara's flagship, an angular fortress pulsing with reactor energy, comfortless and severe. The ship prowled through the void with predatory grace, a weapon as much as a home for its crew. The corridors thrummed with power, their metallic walls bare of ornament, and the air carried a faint tang of ozone and ionized metal. His quarters were a cell in all but name, a narrow cot bolted to the floor, a hygiene alcove barely large enough to stand in, a single shelf bearing nothing but a ration pack, and a sealed water flask. The only light was a sullen blue glow strip running the length of the ceiling. Mason sat on the edge of the cot, shoulders hunched, his carbine dismantled before him in neat, obsessive rows. The ghost of the memory Lysara had invoked, her voice shaping the name Marek, haunted him, curling in the recesses of his mind, but he dismissed it. The Veyroni were masters of psychological warfare. This was just another of their games. The comm on his wall crackled. "Briefing in 5. Riker's voice intoned, heavy with boredom and a hint of concern. Mason snapped his weapon back together with practiced speed and strode into the corridor, the door sliding shut behind him with a finality that felt almost personal. The strategy briefing was held in a chamber as unyielding as the rest of the ship. Holographic displays floated above a steel table, painting the asteroid Delta 12 in shifting shades of red and gold. The room was crowded with Veyroni officers, each adorned in armor that looked as much ceremonial as functional, their faces taut with anticipation and suspicion. Lysara stood at the head of the table, her presence undeniable, emerald hair bound in a warrior's braid, horns catching the light. Karvik, her tactical chief, spoke in clipped, precise tones as he traced a route through the asteroid's labyrinthine tunnels. "A frontal assault will reclaim the relay. Honor demands we strike openly, in force. The swarm will break against our shield wall." His eyes, slitted and cold, dared anyone to disagree. Mason leaned in, studying the holomap, a mass of choke points, vents, and abandoned conduits riddling the asteroid like veins. He could almost smell the trap. He cleared his throat. This will fail. Every eye in the room turned to him, the silence stretching, hostile. Karvek's lips curled. Explain, mercenary. Mason stood his ground, gesturing at the map. You're sending armor into a choke point. The swarm will bring it down on your heads. They've done it before, haven't they? You're walking into their kill box. He circled a cluster of dormant magma vents with a sweep of his finger. Here. These vents are abandoned on the records, but they're wide enough for a squad. If we plant charges on the core and hit their comms when your main force attacks, you'll sow chaos. Cut their lines, and your troops mop up what's left. Karvek's jaw clenched. Deceit, sabotage, he spat. We are Veyroni. We face our foes openly. Mason met his glare, unflinching. They're bugs. They don't care about honor. Your pride is their weapon. He turned to Lysara, voice low but clear. You brought me here to win. Let me do it my way. The room erupted in low, angry murmurs. Mason ignored them, tapping a datapad and sketching out a schematic as the officers bickered. Without thinking, his fingers danced across the interface, lines coalescing into the shape of an energy rifle. Its core spiraled with a resonance chamber he'd never seen before. Elegant, deadly, Veyroni in its logic yet unfamiliar. Lysara's gaze flicked from the officers to the design on Mason's pad. She leaned in, her presence suddenly electric, eyes burning with a strange urgency. Where did you learn this? She pressed, voice barely above a whisper. It's restricted Veyroni science. Mason hesitated, pulse skipping. I just knew. Even as he said it, the words unsettled him. He hadn't studied Veyroni schematics. Hell, he'd barely survived the last 9 years piecing together his own memories. Yet the design felt as natural as breathing. Lysara's eyes lingered on his wrists, then darted to her own, where long sleeves hid the faintest pattern of swirling scars. Mason saw something desperate in her, as if she was assembling a puzzle whose edges only she could see. The mission was greenlit, reluctantly, at first. Karvek's warriors bristled at the plan, but Lysara's word was final. The assault began at 0 hour. As predicted, the Veyroni armored column advanced into the primary corridor, and the swarm collapsed the ceiling with preset charges, trapping half the force. Static and panic flooded the comms, but Mason and his hand-picked team, faces streaked with heat shield paste, were already deep inside the asteroid, crawling through stifling magma vents that reeked of sulfur and ancient ash. The path was a claustrophobic nightmare, tunnels barely wide enough to crawl, sweat pooling under armor, the distant thud of swarm claws echoing in the rock. Mason led from the front, navigating by instinct, feeling for subtle vibrations in the conduit's walls, danger, opportunity, the way forward. Riker, close behind, grumbled. Next time, let's pick a route with actual air, boss. Just keep moving. Mason growled, voice muffled by his rebreather. We're nearly through. At the end of the vent, Mason paused, listening to the way the metal thrummed under his palm. He signaled, and the squad fanned out. Veyroni and Terran, side by side, for the first time trusting in a plan that felt more like subterfuge than valor. They emerged into the relay's shadow, just as the swarm's attention snapped to the Veyroni main assault. Mason set charges atop a precarious rock shelf, his hands steady, his mind oddly quiet. When the detonator clicked home, he felt a surge of certainty, as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. On his signal, Lysara's warriors stormed the control hub, their war cries rising in unison. Mason's charges detonated, the explosion roaring through the tunnels, burying the swarm's command node under tons of molten rock. The surviving Veyroni surged forward, momentum now theirs, cutting through the disorganized enemy ranks with ruthless precision. Mason moved like a ghost through the chaos, his carbine spitting blue fire, covering Lysara as she advanced. They fought side by side, her blade arcing in lethal sweeps, his shots picking off stragglers. Their movements meshed without a word, almost a dance, as if they'd trained together for years. Mason felt an eerie sense of déjà vu, his body anticipating her moves before she made them. The last of the swarm fell. Silence crashed down, broken only by the crackle of flames and the hiss of cooling stone. Afterward, aboard the battered shuttle bound for the Warden, Lysara sat opposite Mason, tending a gash on his forearm. The cabin shuddered as the pilot punched through the asteroid's debris field. Lysara's hands were gentle, her touch cool and sure as she cleaned the wound, her face intent. Mason tried to pull away. "I can handle it," he muttered, but her grip tightened just enough to keep him still. She tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it around his arm, her fingers lingering, the contact sending a shock through him that had nothing to do with pain. "Marek," she whispered, voice breaking, pleading. Her eyes searched his face for any glimmer of recognition. A memory flashed, sharp, impossible. A child's cry echoing through smoke, the sight of emerald hair streaming against a burning sky, arms reaching for him as chaos swallowed the world. Then it was gone, snuffed out, leaving only emptiness and the ache of something lost. Mason recoiled from her touch, confusion and anger warring in his expression. "Stop," he said, voice rough, fighting the urge to lash out or surrender. He pressed his palm to his forehead, as if he could banish the ghost of that memory by sheer force of will. But Lysara would not yield. She watched him, her eyes filled with hope and sorrow, refusing to let go of the past. Or of him. Lysara requisitioned a long-range scout under the pretense of recon, bypassing the usual layers of bureaucratic scrutiny with the authority that only victory and legend granted. Command approved, pleased with the outcome at Delta 12, but puzzled by her insistence on a solo mission into uncharted territory. Mason watched from the periphery as she signed the transfer, her expression unreadable, the words unspoken between them swelling like a storm. The vessel was built for speed, its hull a wedge of dark alloy etched with Veyroni glyphs and Terran repair welds, a testament to a war that had not yet decided its heroes or its monsters. Inside, the cabin was barely more than a cockpit and 2 crash seats. Lysara sat at the controls, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the star charts. Mason took the co-pilot seat, hands restless in his lap, gaze locked on the shifting blur of hyperspace. The hum of the drive filled the silence, each passing minute stretching the tension tighter. They said nothing. There was nothing to say. Mason tried to distract himself by counting the stars, but the unfamiliar constellations only heightened his unease. He could not shake the feeling that whatever waited at their destination would strip him bare. They dropped from FTL with a lurch, the ship shuddering as it entered a dead zone on the edge of mapped space. Before them, suspended in a mist of radioactive fog, loomed the Halcyon outpost, a sprawling hulk, its spine snapped, modules hanging from twisted cables. Whole wings were blasted open to vacuum. No lights burned in its windows. Mason's voice was a whisper. "Why here?" Lysara's hands hovered over the controls. "To help you remember," she said softly. There was no accusation, only quiet certainty. They suited up in silence. The exosuit's seals hissed, faceplates flickering as their systems adjusted for hard radiation. Lysara led the way through the docking umbilical, her movements sure even in low gravity. Mason followed, boots echoing against scorched deck plates, the hiss of his breath loud in his helmet. They entered through a breached airlock, picking their way past debris and floating shards of glass. The corridors were haunted by silence and the slow drift of dust. Crumpled signage in faded colors labeled everything in Veyroni and Terran, half the letters scorched away. The deeper they went, the stronger Mason's sense of wrongness grew. Every echo, every flicker of light at the edge of vision sent his heart racing. In a side corridor, a mural caught his eye, a crude, cartoonish painting of an eight-legged beast, fangs bared in a mock roar. Something in the garish colors and looping lines stirred a pang of nostalgia so sharp it stole his breath. He staggered, reaching for the wall. A child's laughter rang in his mind, echoing in his helmet. A memory not his, and yet utterly familiar. He looked down, and for a heartbeat he saw a small violet hand grasping his, tugging him forward with the fearless urgency of youth. He blinked, and the vision vanished. Lysara was beside him, watching quietly. "The bond remembers, even if you do not," she murmured, her voice filtered through static. She guided him deeper, her own hands trembling as they neared a heavy, scorched door marked with radiation warnings and the faded sigil of Project Unity. Mason's steps faltered. The door loomed before him like a tombstone. As Lysara pressed a hand to the control panel, pain crashed over him, white-hot agony dropping him to his knees. His helmet display blurred as memories surged and retreated. His breath came in ragged bursts. Lysara knelt beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder. "It wasn't pirates," she said quietly, as if sharing a confession with the ghosts that lingered. "This was a research hub, Project Unity, an attempt to merge our species' strengths. Neural fusion at the deepest level. We were the prototype." Her words landed like blows. Mason stared at her, horror dawning in his eyes. "My lost memories?" She met his gaze, the sorrow in her crimson eyes fathomless. "The attack severed the incomplete link," she explained. "Your mind was wiped, but the connection endured. You fight like a Veyroni because part of our doctrine is imprinted in you, and you carry an echo of the swarm's hive mind. That is why you see their tactics before they strike. Why you dream of things you have never lived." Mason's sense of self fractured, the floor tilting beneath him. He was not a survivor, not even a soldier in the ordinary sense. He was a living experiment, a vessel for the ambitions and failures of two civilizations. Your people, did this?" His voice was thick with fury and betrayal. Lysara nodded, her own pain plain in every word. "Yes." Her voice broke. She stripped off her glove with shaking fingers, exposing the intricate lattice of scars winding up her arm, pale lines that shimmered faintly under the suit's lights. "These are the bonds, Mark." She reached for him, rolling up his sleeve with gentle insistence. Mason's breath caught as he saw matching faded lines etched into his own skin, half lost beneath old burns and newer scars. For the first time, he saw her not as an enemy or commander, but as someone equally broken, her search not for a weapon, but for the other half of her soul, torn away by violence and fate. Lysara's voice dropped to a whisper, the words trembling between hope and devastation. "The bond," she said, eyes shimmering. "When it broke, it left a void. I've felt it every day since. A wound that will not heal." The memories pressed at the edges of Mason's consciousness, a kaleidoscope of pain and longing, flashes of heat and color. He remembered running through the outpost's halls, Lysara's laughter trailing behind him. The way their hands fit together, even then. The surge of triumph when they cracked a puzzle no adult could solve. The terror when the alarm screamed, fire and swarm claws tearing through metal. The agony as something inside him shattered, leaving only darkness. He recoiled from her touch, stumbling back as if the contact burned. Confusion and anger warred across his face, but beneath it all was fear. A bone-deep terror that he was less a man than a sum of traumas, a creature built by desperate hands in a time of war. Lysara watched him, her own pain unmasked, her posture no longer that of a commander but of a woman bereft. She, too, was a victim, creator, partner, prisoner to the same ancient wound. She did not beg, did not command. She simply waited, letting the silence bear witness to all that had been stolen from them. The silence pressed in, thick with grief, and the fragile hope that memory, once broken, might be forged anew, not by science or strategy, but by the stubborn persistence of something that refused to die. In the ruined heart of Halcyon Outpost, surrounded by the ghosts of their past, they were both unmade and remade, linked not by fate or mission, but by the inescapable ache of what they had been and what they might still become. Back on the Obsidian Warden, Mason found himself propelled into the blinding glare of Veyronia tension. The bridge was electric with tension, every officer's glance sharper, measuring him anew. He could feel the shift. Where once he'd been an expendable outsider, now he was something else. Asset, anomaly, or perhaps a threat in the making. The victory at Delta 12 had made certain of that. He was summoned to the high command deck, its vaulted ceiling echoing with the hum of power. High Commander Oris waited for him, the old Veyroni's armor embossed with ancient battle glyphs, every movement slow and deliberate. Lysara stood at his flank, her face unreadable, posture rigid. Oris appraised Mason with eyes like burnished copper. Terran Mason, your instincts are formidable. You see patterns where we see tradition. For this, I offer command of a covert strike team. You would answer directly to me. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Mason's stomach twisted. He glanced at Lysara, expecting her to meet his gaze, but she stared straight ahead. Then she stepped forward. With respect, High Commander, that is unwise. The Terran is unstable. He requires further observation, under my command. A beat of silence. Oris's brow furrowed, considering. Explain. Lysara's tone was measured, but there was an undercurrent of steel. His value is proven, but his condition is unpredictable. Until we know the full extent of his capabilities, he is a greater asset close at hand than on a leash too long to control. Mason saw it for what it was. Protection. She was shielding him, keeping him close, at the price of her own standing. The realization kindled anger, hot and sudden, coiling beneath his ribs. He waited until the meeting dissolved, Veyroni and Terran alike dispersing in wary knots. He stalked Lysara through the labyrinthine corridors, boots ringing on the polished deck, catching up with her at a deserted crossway, the hum of the engines a distant undercurrent. He blocked her path, voice sharp with accusation. What was that? Trying to control me? She didn't flinch. I am keeping you alive. If they find out about the bond, they'll dissect you, Mason. You know what the Veyroni do with threats they can't explain. He pressed closer, hand braced against the bulkhead beside her head. And what do you see? A threat? Or a mistake you're trying to erase? Her eyes flashed, the deep red shimmering with pain. I see someone I won't lose again. The words slipped out, raw and quiet. He reached for her, intending only to touch her arm, but the contact triggered a psychic surge, images and feelings roaring through him. Years of her loneliness on the command deck, his own chaos and longing, the swarm's whispers like static at the edges of consciousness. Pain and panic, yes, but also something else, a desperate, wild connection, a sense of being seen. He jerked his hand back, breath ragged. I won't be their tool. Lysara's voice steadied. And I won't let them use you. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, old exhaustion mixing with relief. We are the last of Unity's experiment, Mason. If you fall into their hands, I lose everything. They will destroy you. Or worse, try to make more like us. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was charged, the old anger burning down to embers of understanding. Fine, Mason said, the word a surrender and a challenge. If we're broken, we'll be broken together. Teach me to control this. I'm done running from it. Lysara sagged, a weight lifting from her. And I will learn from you. There are things I have never understood, ways of thinking, of surviving, that are alien to me. We share this bond, whether we want it or not. Training began in the deep meditation chambers, a cathedral of stone and shadow beneath the warden's engines. The air was cool, scented with incense and ancient resin, the silence broken only by the soft chime of the psychic focusing stones. They knelt opposite each other on woven mats, Lysara guiding him through the rituals of Veyroni mental discipline. Breathe, she instructed, her voice low, almost musical. Feel the static at the edge of your mind. Do not fight it. Shape it into a barrier. Picture your thoughts as a fortress. Let nothing through unless you allow it. At first, Mason's efforts were clumsy. The swarm's echo battered at him, 1,000 discordant voices. But Lysara was relentless, her own mind a steady beacon in the noise. Between sessions, he taught her Terran methods, how to improvise, to embrace unpredictability, to thrive in chaos. Honor is a luxury, he told her, smiling grimly as they sparred hand to hand. Survival isn't. Use my chaos. I'll use your discipline. She laughed, a rare, bright sound. You are the only Terran I've ever met who can make strategy out of madness. Their training deepened, each lesson a step toward repairing the broken link between their minds. Lysara showed him visions of her first battle, memories vivid and sharp. The press of bodies, the metallic taste of fear, the desperate pride in her commander's eyes. Mason, in turn, shared his oldest true memory, waking alone in a battered med clinic, no name, no past, only pain and the slow return of function. Their pain resonated, walls dissolving. The meditation chamber became a crucible. He found himself watching her more closely. The way emerald strands of hair caught the candlelight. The elegant curve of her horns. The power in her stance even at rest. The intimacy of shared silence grew until, during one deep session, the boundaries between them dissolved entirely. He was swept into a memory, not his, not hers, but theirs. He saw a small vent, dust swirling in the air. A girl with green hair crouched beside him, her violet skin luminous in the gloom. She pressed a crystal into his palm, her expression fierce with determination. No matter what, she whispered, this will connect us. I'll always find you, Merrick. The memory swelled, a rush of warmth and belonging. He felt the texture of the crystal, the trembling strength of her fingers, the promise echoing through his soul. When he opened his eyes, Lysara was kneeling before him, tears streaking down her cheeks, her hand still clasped in his. He leaned forward, brushing her tears away with his thumb. His lips met hers, tentative at first. A question, an answer, a homecoming all at once. The kiss was electric, a psychic shockwave racing through the bond, obliterating years of longing and loneliness. In that instant, the connection between them reforged, no longer a wound, but an anchor. Mason's mind anchored to Lysara's presence. For the first time, the swarm's whispers became patterns, strategies, not madness. The chaos was still there, but now it was a weapon, not a curse. And in her eyes he saw the reflection of his own soul. Broken, yes, but whole enough for both of them. Their bond, now a weapon as much as a promise, drew eyes across the command decks of the Obsidian Warden. Word of their psychic unity moved through the crew like a charge, igniting rumor, awe, and a tremor of fear. It was not long before High Commander Oris summoned them to the strategic core, a chamber alive with data streams, battle simulations flickering in the gloom. Oris stood at the center, his presence a gravitational force. Around him, technomancers in their mirrored masks whispered in digital tongues, parsing streams of probability. Lysara's stride was unwavering, Mason a step behind, the new strength of their bond crackling in the space between them. Oris wasted no time. "Your predictive abilities are remarkable," he intoned, his voice echoing off the metal and stone. "The technomancers believe you could serve as a living conduit, processing combat data at quantum speed. The swarm's moves, our responses, all channeled through you. Victory, at the cost of your individuality." Mason's blood chilled. He saw it in a flash. Himself hooked into the warden's core, mind stripped and scattered, his thoughts devoured by war. A tool, nothing more. Lysara stepped forward, a wall of violet and emerald between Mason and Oris. "No," she said, voice like a drawn blade. "He is under my protection. You will not touch him." Oris's eyes narrowed, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "That sounded like defiance, Commander." "It was," Lysara replied, holding his gaze. "I will not sacrifice the man to empower the weapon." The silence that followed was seismic. Oris regarded her with the weight of centuries of protocol. "You understand what you are doing? Your rebellion will cost you everything." Lysara's chin lifted, her answer clear. "I understand." They were dismissed, the air thick with unsaid threats. That night the shift was palpable. Lysara's fate sealed, her future with the warden uncertain. Mason found her quarters easily, the guards gone, the door unlocked as if waiting for him. He paused at the threshold, watching her. She stood before the viewport, emerald hair unbound, the galaxy's light painting her skin in shifting hues. Her armor was gone, replaced by a simple tunic, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. He spoke softly. "You risked everything for me." She turned, crimson eyes shining with something fierce and fragile. "There was nothing left to risk. Without you, duty was hollow. I would have been a shell. I am done with survival without purpose." He crossed the space, hesitating only when he was close enough to see the tremble in her jaw. He lifted his hand, cradling her face, thumb tracing the line of her lips. Her skin was cool, but there was fire beneath. He could feel it, pulsing in time with his own heart. "I'm not him, Lysara, not the boy you lost," he said, voice catching on old sorrow. She leaned into his touch. "I know, he's gone, but you're here. You are mine, Mason. Whatever you are now, whatever we become, it is enough." The last of the walls fell. Mason bent, brushing his lips against hers, tentative, then deeper, surrendering. She responded in kind, fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer until nothing existed but the heat between them. Hands roamed, armor and clothing falling away in urgent, clumsy motions. Her body was cool marble, blood a river of flame. His touch sparked a psychic surge, memories and longing blending until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Their union transcended the physical, a final merging of minds, a psychic fusion that obliterated loneliness. Lysara's mind was a sanctuary, vast and aching, and Mason found himself at the center, anchored for the first time since Halcyon. He poured his fears and his hope into her, and she answered with acceptance and fierce love. Afterward, they drifted in silence, limbs entwined, hearts beating a slow, shared rhythm. Outside, the fleet waited for orders, unsure what to do with them. Mason stared at the ceiling, clarity settling over him like dawn after a storm. The bond was no longer a wound, but a conduit of strength. The swarm's voices, once chaos, had become a stream of intelligible patterns, their logic clear and their intent laid bare. With Lysara as his anchor, Mason's mind found purpose. They spent every waking moment together, thoughts intertwining so seamlessly that spoken words became almost unnecessary. In that shared space, a plan began to take shape. Not Veironi, not Terran, but something new. He explained it to her as they watched the nebula swirl beyond the glass. "They're a hive," he said, drawing neural maps in the air between them. "Oris thinks he's fighting an army, but he's wrong. It's an organism. You do not defeat it by attrition, you kill it by striking the brain." Lysara leaned forward, eyes bright with understanding. "The neural node," she breathed. "Deep in swarm territory. The one the scouts never returned from. If we can breach it?" He nodded. A full fleet assault would be suicide, but a single strike craft, flown by two minds in perfect sync, could slip through the gaps in their consciousness. We become a ghost in the neural static. She considered the odds, weighing them against the certainty of defeat if they did nothing. You could map their reactions. I could shield us from detection. Together, we might have a chance. He took her hand, their fingers locking. "We'll need a diversion. A false push from the fleet. Something big enough to pull the swarm's focus away from the node. When the chaos peaks, we punch through in a stealth ship." Lysara nodded, resolve hardening. "I will stake my command, my honor, my life on this plan. Oris will listen. He has seen what we can do." She brought the proposal to the War Council, standing tall as whispers rippled through the chamber. Mason waited at her side, silent but unflinching. Oris listened, arms folded, face impassive as Lysara laid out the plan in detail, her every word measured, her conviction clear. She made no apologies, no disclaimers. She spoke as the last and best hope of their fractured alliance. When she finished, Oris regarded them both. Something changed in his eyes, old fear replaced by the sharp glint of belief. "Approved," he said. "The fleet will move on your signal." Their fate was set. The path ahead uncertain, but theirs to walk. Together. The cockpit of the Wraith was built for stealth, not comfort. Barely wide enough for two. Every surface lined with black composite and flickering with hollow interfaces. Mason and Lysara sat pressed together, knees braced, shoulders touching. The psionic link helmet encased their heads in a shared field of luminous circuitry, neural threads weaving from her scalp to his, blurring the line between flesh and mind. There was no more him and her, only us. One pulse, one will. The mission unfolded with relentless precision. Out the forward view, the Veironi fleet had engaged, lances of blue fire crackling across the void as the swarm surged to meet them. Mason felt the distant tremors of battle in his chest, each detonation a muted echo through the ship's hull. The fleet's engaged, Lysara thought, her mental voice calm, steady as bedrock. Mason's lips curled in a crooked smile as his fingers danced over the controls, guiding the Wraith through the black. "They always fall for it," he replied in the shared space, the words not spoken but felt, a ripple of amusement and challenge. The ship was alive beneath him, sensitive to every twitch of his hand, every pulse of his intent. He felt Lysara's mind, a cool river running through the chaos, lending clarity to his storm of improvisation. Together, they threaded the Wraith through the shifting debris of the asteroid field, hull singing as rocks skimmed past at impossible speed. Their thoughts tangled and untangled in perfect time, anticipation and intuition feeding one another. Ahead, the neural node came into view, a grotesque organic spire, its surface glistening with a living sheen, tendrils pulsing with energy. It hovered in the eye of the swarm's armada, protected by concentric rings of bioengineered ships. Mason's breath hitched. The node radiated a psychic pressure that made his teeth ache. He flared the engines and angled the Wraith toward a nebula, feinting away from the node. Swarm interceptors broke from formation to pursue, snapping at the bait. Lysara's thought voice was a whisper of strategy. Now, the left flank, there's a gap opening. He saw it through her senses. A window in the shifting mass, barely wide enough for the wraith. Hold tight, Mason replied, gut tightening. We go together. He banked hard, feeling her anticipation, her confidence bracing his nerves. They shot through the breach, swarm fire blazing past their hull, the world reduced to light and movement and instinct. Mason dodged plasma bolts by reflex, but it was not just his reflex. Lysara's discipline filtered the chaos, sharpening every response. The wraith spun and rolled, slipping through patterns only they could see. They burst through the last defensive ring. The neural node towered before them, its core exposed, throbbing with a light that felt wrong, ancient, hungry. Then the swarm struck, not with weapons, but with thought. A psychic assault crashed through the cockpit, a billion shrieking voices, pain blooming behind Mason's eyes. He fought to keep his grip on reality as alien emotions, rage, terror, desperation, poured into him. His hand shook on the targeting yoke. Lysara's presence closed around his mind like a shield. Stay with me, she urged, her will burning bright, pushing back the tide of madness. She drew the swarm's static away from him, absorbing the brunt of the onslaught, her own mind a fortress. He focused, locking onto the core. As his finger closed on the trigger, he felt more than the target. He sensed the swarm's ancient intelligence recoiling in fear and rage. For an instant, a flicker of his lost self bridged the gap, a memory of running through Halcyon's corridors, hand in hand with a green-haired girl, the promise of never being alone. The swarm's pain mingled with his own. But he was no longer alone, not lost. He had Lysara, and through her, strength. He fired. Twin plasma warheads streaked from the wraith, screaming into the core. The moment they struck, the node ruptured in a geyser of blue-white fire, a psychic scream detonating through the link. The agony was unimaginable, a billion minds dying, a godbrain shattering. Mason and Lysara felt it all. Terror, fury, a final echoing emptiness. The swarm fleet convulsed, ships spinning out of formation, coherence lost. Silence slammed into the cockpit, oppressive and pure. The war was over. The swarm was broken. Mason slumped forward, trembling, sweat beading his brow. Lysara's hands rested over his on the controls, her touch grounding him. Gently, she lifted the helmet away, breaking the psionic link. The noise faded. The only sound was their mingled breath. The silence inside his mind was beautiful, startling in its clarity, the old static gone. He reached for Lysara's wrist, tracing the mark of the bond there, the faint scars a reminder of everything they had survived. He turned to her, voice steady and sure. I remember everything, Lysara. The outpost, the promise. You found me. A single tear slid down her cheek, her lips trembling with relief. I told you I'd find you, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. He smiled, feeling, at last, whole. You did. The emptiness that had haunted his past was gone, replaced by memory and meaning. The war was over. The galaxy changed. But in the cramped cockpit of the Wraith, adrift among the stars, their own story was just beginning. They lingered in the stillness, hands entwined, savoring the peace they had forged together, knowing whatever waited beyond, they would face it as one.